Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making millions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might just sell credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/hidden. Protect yourself now at aura.com/hidden.
Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. On the morning of December 5th, 1952, a cold, still fog settled over London. This was not in itself unusual. London had always had fog. The city had been famous for its fog for centuries, the thick, yellowish, sulfurous pea soupers that Dickens had described, that Sherlock Holmes himself had navigated, that had become part of the city's identity as surely as the Thames or the Tower. Londoners knew the fog. But what settled over the city on December 5th, 1952, was something different. By the time it lifted 5 days later, somewhere between 4,000 and 12,000 people were dead. And the British government spent the next several years trying to make sure the public didn't find out. Our history brief today returns to some Hollywood versus history, and whether we can trust historical movies made while the history they are depicting is still happening. A quick word from our sponsors.
Tired of your car insurance rate going up, even with a clean driving record? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/Libsyn today. That's JERRY.ai/LIBSYN.
This day in history. On June 21st, 1788, New Hampshire became the ninth state to ratify the Constitution, providing the crucial approval needed for the document to take effect and establish the United States government. On June 21st, 1948, Columbia Records introduced the long playing record, or the LP, allowing listeners to enjoy much longer recordings than previously possible and transforming the music industry. Story of the day. The Great Smog had two parents. The first was weather. In early December 1952, a high pressure system settled over southern England, bringing cold, still air that trapped everything beneath it like a lid on a pot. There was no wind, there was nowhere for anything to go. The second parent was coal. Britain in 1952 ran on coal. Homes were heated by coal fires. Power stations burned coal. Factories burned coal. Trains burned coal. The city of London produced an enormous volume of smoke, soot, and sulfur dioxide every single day, normally dispersed by wind and weather into the atmosphere above. On December 5th, there was no wind. The smoke had nowhere to go. It combined with the natural fog and with the sulfur dioxide and particles already hanging in the still air, and it became something far more dangerous than just ordinary fog. It became an aerosol of sulfuric acid, droplets of acid suspended in air, invisible, breathable, and quite lethal. The 5 days that followed were unlike anything London had experienced in living memory. The smog reduced visibility to a few feet. Buses stopped running because drivers could not see the road. Films were canceled at cinemas because audiences inside the buildings could not see the screen through the smog seeping through every crack and gap. Cattle at Smithfield Market were found dead, suffocated by the air they were breathing. Ambulances stopped running. The drivers couldn't see, and people who collapsed in the streets sometimes lay there for hours. Hospitals filled with patients suffering from respiratory diseases. The smog did not smell like anything unusual. It did not sting the eyes particularly. It looked like, ordinary fog. It was killing people as they went about their ordinary lives, breathing what felt like ordinary London air. The elderly and those with pre existing respiratory conditions died first. But the smog did not spare the young or the healthy. Thousands of Londoners developed severe bronchitis, pneumonia, and respiratory failure in the days and weeks following the smog. The death registers filled in a way that was impossible to ignore. In the week of the smog and the week following, London recorded approximately 4,000 more deaths than would normally be expected for that time of the year. But the true death toll, accounting for delayed deaths from respiratory complications in the weeks and months that followed, has been estimated by modern researchers at between 10 to 12,000 people. In 5 days, a fog killed more people in London than the Blitz had killed in many of its worst nights. The government's response was one of the more cynical episodes in post war British political history. The Minister of Health, Ian MacLeod, initially dismissed concerns about the smog's health effects. Officials suggested the excess deaths were caused by an influenza epidemic, a claim that was not supported by the medical evidence but provided a convenient alternative explanation. The government was reluctant to acknowledge the true cause for reasons that were not difficult to understand. Acknowledging that coal pollution had killed thousands of people meant acknowledging that something had to change about how Britain heated its homes, ran its power stations, and managed its industries. Coal was the foundation of British industrial life. The coal industry was politically powerful as well, and the conservative government of Winston Churchill, back in power since 1951, was not inclined toward the kind of regulatory intervention that addressing the problem would require. The cover up was not exactly a conspiracy. It was something more mundane and in some ways more troubling. Institutional reluctance to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth because the consequences of acknowledging it were politically difficult. The pressure that eventually forced action came not from government but from a backbench MP named Gerald Nabarro, and from a persistent campaign of public and scientific pressure that built through 1953 and 1954. Researchers published studies establishing the link between the smog and the death toll. Newspapers ran stories. The public, which had lived through the smog and watched neighbors and family members die in its aftermath, was not easily dismissed. By 1956, the government had been pushed, reluctantly, incrementally, but pushed indeed, into passing the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act of 1956 was the first legislation of its kind in British history. It created smoke control areas in which the burning of certain fuels was prohibited. It required power stations to be built away from urban centers. It provided subsidies to help households convert from coal to cleaner fuels. It was not perfect, it was not immediate in its effects, but it worked. In the decades following the act, London's air quality improved dramatically. The legendary London pea souper, the sulphurous yellow fog that had been part of the city's atmosphere for a century, gradually disappeared. The Great Smog of 1952 is not remembered as widely as it deserves to be. It killed more people than almost any single peacetime disaster in modern British history. It was caused by decisions about how to heat homes, how to power cities, how to manage industrial emissions that were made by governments and industries and ordinary people over decades. And it was addressed eventually because the death toll was too large and too undeniable to be deflected indefinitely onto influenza. The history brief. When we think about historical movies, we usually assume there's some distance between the filmmakers and the events they're depicting years, decades, sometimes centuries. But what happens when Hollywood tries to tell history before history is even finished? It turns out this has happened more than you may think. Let's take the Green Berets. Released during the Vietnam War and starring John Wayne, the film portrayed American involvement as a clear struggle between good and evil. The problem? The war itself was still raging. The Tet Offensive had just occurred. Public opinion was rapidly changing, and many of the facts historians now use to evaluate the conflict simply were not available yet. Today, most historians view the film less as a historical account and more as a snapshot of what one segment of America at the time wanted to believe about the war in 1968. Then there's the movie Mission to Moscow. Made during World War II, while the United States and the Soviet Union were allies, the film presented Joseph Stalin and the Soviet government in an extraordinarily favorable light, at the same time strengthening support for wartime alliances that seemed politically important at the time. Only later, after the war and the start of the Cold War, did audiences fully appreciate how distorted that portrayal had been. The movie did not become inaccurate because facts changed. It became inaccurate because, well, history kept unfolding. Perhaps the most fascinating example, though, is All the President's Men. The movie is excellent and remains one of the most respected journalism films ever made. Yet, it was released only 2 years after Richard Nixon resigned over Watergate. At the time, many documents remained sealed. Key participants were still alive, and historians were only beginning to understand the full scope of the scandal. The film did get a great deal right, but even it reflects the limitations of writing history in real time. And that's really the challenge here. Historical films made during or immediately after major events face a problem that historians know very well. You can't see the ending yet. When filmmakers make a movie about an ongoing war, political crisis, revolution, or social movement, they don't know which events will ultimately matter most. They don't know which figures will become heroes or villains. They don't know which decisions will have consequences decades later. In short, they lack perspective. But here's the thing, none of this necessarily makes the films worthless. In fact, they can become incredibly valuable, not because they accurately explain the event, but because they reveal how people understood that event at that given moment. Today, historians often study films like The Green Berets not to understand Vietnam, but to understand American attitudes toward Vietnam in 1968. The movie becomes a historical artifact in itself, a window into contemporary fears, hopes, assumptions, and biases. And that's why historical films made during ongoing events occupy this strange space between journalism, propaganda, memory, and even history. They're often too early to be fully accurate, but they're perfectly timed to capture what people believed. Which raises another interesting question. When a historical movie is made before history is finished, is it telling us about the past or about the present? Anyway, just a thought. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and helping make this little show such a mighty success. If you're enjoying this show and would like to help with its production, you can always donate a few dollars at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad-free. Both of those links can be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. Make sure you guys find our YouTube channel where we have different videos and series that are not part of this main feed. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you all again tomorrow.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.